Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the show. I am super excited today to have on Becky Aste. And we've kind of gotten to know each other through podcasting, and her podcast is called Your Breakthrough Blueprint. And she does also has something called I Do Breakthroughs. But I was wanting to have her on because she has done something that I'm not really familiar with. So I wanted to learn from her. And I also thought that it would be something that you guys would also might want to learn about too. So welcome, Becky. How are you?
Thank you. I'm good. Just finishing up my last sips of my morning coffee and excited to chat with you.
Awesome. So I just to get started, I just would love for you to kind of tell a brief story about how you got where you are today and kind of how you introduced to the modalities in which you practice.
Sure, yeah. I currently am a trauma-informed marriage coach, finishing up my practitioner certification to officially be able to call myself a somatic practitioner, which somatic just means pertaining to the body, in contrast to the mind, and I'm sure we'll get into that. But I teach highly ambitious wives how to repair connection and intimacy in their marriage by moving trauma out of their body. And so I did not get to this role because I've had a squeaky, shining marriage. We went through a lot. After 10 years of really this toxic dance of codependency and addiction, you might call it, or anxious attachment style and avoidant attachment style, or just chase and run, where I would chase and he would run. I was the quote unquote needy one, and he was the one that needed space. So when we were good, we were good. But when we weren't, this toxic dance was just picking up steam, and really reached its head year 10 of our marriage. And so found ourselves, after 10 years, 2 kids later, separated, talking about divorce. My life had turned upside down. I felt like my nervous system was on fire. I felt like I was losing my mind. I remember calling my best friend and just being like, Courtney, I think this is where people are before they have like an actual psychotic break or mental breakdown and are admitted for help. Like, I feel so unstable right now. And that's when I was on Instagram, of all places, and stumbled upon this woman's page who was also a relationship coach and taught women to heal after trauma in their marriage and repair their marriage. And it was interesting because at that time I was getting a lot of unsolicited advice, you could call it, from just friends and family that were looking out for my best interest and just saying things like, you deserve better, just dump his butt. I don't know if I can swear on this podcast. Just leave him. Things things like that. And it just didn't resonate with me. And I felt like it added to the confusion. And this felt like, here's this woman that's saying, even if you have been through the worst in your marriage and, are on the verge of divorce, like there's a chance to save it. So long story short, that was the first ever online coach that I invested in. It felt crazy on the one hand that I was paying a stranger off Instagram $5,000 for this last ditch effort to help save my marriage. And on the other hand, it felt like the most right decision I had ever made in my life. It was the first time I remember feeling like, I think this is what it's like to be listening to your intuition and to trust your gut, as they say, because everything in my body is just saying, get in her space no matter the cost. So fast forward, that ended up being the game changer. It was like the buzzer beater, last second miracle that took us from dying to surviving at first, and then healing, and now thriving. And I tell people I'm on my second marriage. It happens to be with the same person, but we've completely redesigned, like thrown out the old model or blueprint, you could say, and reconstructed something that's so different than where we started, but it's so much better and beautiful and far from perfect. And I like it that way. And yeah, the program was the first introduction I ever had to somatic work. So I'm sure we'll get more into what that is.
Yeah, for sure. First of all, thank you so much for sharing your story, because there are a lot of people that either in their marriage or in other relationships struggle.
Mm-hmm.
And they struggle because of things that may have happened in their past, their upbringing, their relationship skills or non-relationship skills, how they saw their home life, what their model of relationships were, whether it was in the home or just with friends or, relatives. So we pick up all of these things along our way, and we start to believe that that's truth, or we start to believe that, we're not good enough for something, and so we must do this other thing. And so there's so much pre-programming that happens. And then when you get into a marriage, you've got two people coming from two completely different programs and what they've learned growing up. And marriage is not easy. You could have the best marriage and it's not easy, but nobody ever said when you're standing at the altar that it was going to be easy. That's one of the things that I heard you kind of saying. But what I also heard you saying, which I really feel is such an amazing gift, is that you gifted yourself something that changed the trajectory of not only your marriage, but yourself. And so by investing in you and learning what you had suppressed or what your traumas were or how you were storing stuff in your body, you're now allowing yourself not only to show up better in your marriage, but in all aspects of your life. And so now you're a different model for your children than you would have been, had a different circumstance, happened. So for those people who don't know, could you explain a little bit of what somatic actually means and what you mean by trauma informed, and kind of break down the lingo?
Yeah, I'd love to. And just before defining what you just said was exactly my experience. It was like the marriage was maybe the biggest fire in my life. It was the one that was causing me the most distress and I was ruminating about the most. But all the other areas kind of sucked too, like my parenting, my relationship with money, my spiritual life. And what I found was learning all of this in application to my marriage ended up trickling into healing money wounds and becoming, a parent that is in alignment with really who I want to be, not just reacting out of my own, survival responses with them, my spiritual life, my trajectory of my career and purpose. So that's the cool thing with whatever brings you in the door for the deep healing, whether it is the marriage or some other area. Once you start with one, it's like it does trickle into other areas of your life. So,
and before you start to talk about the actual terms and things, one of the things that I always like to point out is that health and wellness is, again, not just the food on your plate. You could be eating salad all day long, but if you're in a toxic state of being, if your relationships are not well, if your finances are not well, if you have things that you haven't actually, balanced out, because, living life in a balanced state is where you're going to find the best wellness. But sometimes we don't have the tools because we weren't taught those things. So, okay, sorry. I wanted just to say that because I feel like what we're talking about really does impact our overall wellness in general, not just in a relationship.
1,000%. Well, that leads directly into kind of the definition, I'll say the Dummies 101 version. This is where I need to start anytime I hear a new word. Is somatic is really just pertaining to the body in contrast to the mind. And so what I found, what a lot of women that I work with, I'd say 99% of them have found, is that we've tried for a good, years of our life, decade, in some cases, the women I work with, couple of decades, have tried everything from the neck up. And by that, I mean traditional talk therapy or reading books or listening to podcasts or, deep diving on Instagram and trying to learn stuff, attending webinars, recovery groups. All of those things are great. And I don't downplay them and I don't say don't do them. But if that's all we're working with just from the neck up, we're completely ignoring the rest of our body, where our body is what actually keeps the score of the trauma that we've survived. And it manifests in different ways, like you're saying. So, for example, when my relationship was the most, on the rocks, the worst, I was having eczema outbreaks. There was bloating, there was, anxiety, depression. It was manifesting in physical ways. And I think just in our Western culture, we just see that as normal now. Like, who doesn't have anxiety and depression? Pour yourself another glass of wine, And it's not normal. It's not how we were designed. When we think of kids that do come in the world with total health, they don't have muscle tension, like they don't have anxiety right out of the womb. Like that's our original state. And so what I have learned and what somatic work started to teach me was like, your physical symptoms are not just random, they actually could be messengers that are pointing you to a deeper emotional wound that may need to be healed or trauma released or resolved, or just need to pay attention to. And sometimes not, sometimes it is rooted in just purely a medical thing. But what we do in Western culture often is just skip over anything, that may be related to the emotional piece of it. We just have a headache and we're like, oh, who has an aspirin? Let me get rid of this. This is annoying and interrupting my day. Or, acid reflux, like who's got a Pepto-Bismol? Whereas what I started to learn in somatic work is, hey, these are potentially messages and communication that your body's trying to tell you to look at something deeper. And so I started to learn about my body. I started to learn the different areas of my body, the throat, the chest, the upper abdomen, the lower abdomen are connected to different pain points, emotional sources of dysregulation, dis-ease, imbalance. And I feel like I was uncovering this treasure chest that I'd been sitting on all of this time. And for example, to just bring it down to earth, make it really practical, my whole life I'd always been like tight as hell, like so much tension in my neck and throat area, my jaw completely locked. And I started learning that this area is really connected to speaking your truth, communication, like authentic expression. And that was probably the worst area of my relationship, or just like my being, was I was so afraid to stand up for myself and speak boundaries and say what I'm actually thinking for fear of it rattling my relationship with my husband or whoever. It came up in a lot of areas outside my marriage too. And when I started to pay attention to this as, oh, this is your body trying to tell you to like not lock this inside, like Ariel the mermaid, like start practicing speaking your authentic truth in safe spaces first, and then your husband when you're ready. And so I started to notice like the neck tension dissolving, me being able to release my jaw, like this not being cement, hard as cement, this area, almost as if my body was like, thank you, you're listening to us, like I've been screaming at you for all this time. So
well, I just want to, one thing that you just said that it's just like screaming is, the connection of your body to things. And when we as people have different ailments and different things going on, we have been taught by Western society and just by what we grew up in is it's a surface thing. If your neck is tight, you must have pulled your muscle. If that whole area is tight, it's stress. You need to just relax. It's like your body is speaking to you. Your body, it is the way God designed our body. Our body is smarter than we give it credit for. But one of the things that you said and that you speak about is trauma. And so I just wanted to define that a little bit for people, because I think when people hear the word trauma, they think of giant things like death, like a car, where you're paralyzed, like big trauma, if you are abused, those are trauma, yes, but there's also little trauma, like somebody told you one time you weren't good enough. That's actually a trauma also, if you believe that and you ingest it and you keep it and you don't release it. So can you kind of define that a little bit, just so people understand a variety of trauma, so that when they're listening to this podcast, they can, if they haven't had grandiose type of trauma, they can still relate.
Absolutely. I think a lot of us throw that word around trauma like as if it's describing the event itself, when trauma is actually the impact it leaves on your body and your nervous system. So we can see that a bit more, like let's say we do get in a car accident and then we have like a big gash on our head. We call that like a head trauma. We're not referring to the car crash itself. We are referring to the gash on our head. And so the same goes for, trauma when we're looking at it in the scope of kind of explain the difference. There's what maybe people have heard big T trauma and little T trauma. Big T trauma is referring to something, an event that is a threat to your safety or your life. And you can think too fast, too hard, too soon. So these are things like car crashes, like people, who go to war, like, somebody jumping you on the street. These are things that are a threat to your physical safety and life. Little T traumas are more threats to your love and belonging or your ego. And I like to call these death by a thousand paper cuts. These are the ones that are more what we suffer with in silence, the psychological abuse, the emotional manipulation, the emotional neglect, the gaslighting, maybe infidelity, like all of these things are the silent things that we carry and arguably harder to heal and more of a lasting impact than the big T traumas based on research, because they are sometimes carried and repeated over an entire lifetime, different habits like this. Both big T and little t, it's really just things that overwhelm your nervous system's ability to cope. And so that means it's really not about the event itself that's happening. It's more like our threshold and our unique nervous system. So for example, I'll bring up cheating as an example. Like for some women, they're like, all right, like one time and I'm out, sir. Like, nope, I don't stand for that. And like they move on and they live their best fabulous life. And you're like, wow, how did they do that so easily? Where others, who go through that are just crippled and like cannot function and aren't able to show up for work. And, it impacts them on a much deeper level. So it's not so much about the event itself, it's about your unique nervous system and subconscious blueprint and your threshold of the situation.
Thank you for explaining that. That's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when someone comes to you and they're usually I find that when people have tried, like you said, a bunch of different things and they just keep running up against the wall, that's kind of when they either are introduced to something that's a little off the mainstream, or they stumble into it, or it's just dropped in their lap for some, obviously not for no reason, but I always find that it's not their first go-to, because it's not, again, what we know as a normal, quote unquote, because I consider normal, but some people don't. Modalities that we've been taught, this is not really one of them. And so how is it that you talk with women when they first come to you, to teach them like what it is that they can get from coming to you, or coming, learning about somatic healing, or, healing your trauma? Because to some people, they've never heard of it.
If listeners could only remember one thing I say from this whole conversation, it's what I'm about to say right here. And allow me to geek out for a second. This gets a little nerdy, but we all have what's called the vagus nerve, and it's like the big giant nerve. It's the second biggest nerve in our whole body next to our spinal cord. And you can think of it, it runs from the base of our spine, the base of our skull to the base of our spine. And it is like the superhighway of information, where all chemical messengers, neurotransmitters are constantly running up and down, communicating from our brain to our body to our brain. Now, of all of those messages being sent, only 20% of those messages go from our brain to our body, but 80% go from our body to our brain. So expanding on what we've already talked about, all of the neck up stuff that we try, it's not that it's crap or useless. It works to an extent, but if that's all we're tapping into, it's only working with the 20%. So we're either going to be spinning our wheels for years, like I did and most of my clients. We're going to feel like salmon swimming upstream. And so stepping into somatic work is learning to work with the 80% of the natural flow of messages that our body have been designed to already speak to itself in a way. And so you're working and leveraging, it's like biohacking your body when you get into the body work. And so I share that with women who are pretty hopeless and feel like I've literally tried everything, like nothing has worked, nothing has led to the breakthrough that I wanted. And they start feeling like, what's wrong with me? Or they're in this shame spiral. And it's really amazing because once you begin to learn about the nervous system, you realize, oh, like it wasn't me this whole time. Like I just haven't been taught. Like our Western world doesn't go to the body first. We go to the mind and cerebral stuff and trying to understand the why. And so it's really this glimmer of hope for so many women of, oh, okay, let me, even if it's a little different than what the mainstream is doing, let me maybe try this one last thing. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it totally does. And I think what you just said about the 80/20 is something, again, that we're really not taught. And I find, the gut brain axis also to be very, very interesting. And what I teach people is, what happens in your gut goes up to your brain, so it's like serotonin is made in your gut. So if you are, everything works together. That's what this is kind of bringing to light. It's like if you have if you're getting your gut in check, then that the axis that goes between the gut and the brain helps your nervous system also. So everything is related to the nervous system. And again, I think right now the word calming your nervous system, or getting your nervous system in check, at least the world that I live in and what I see going on and the research that I do, that's a big buzzword right now. And what I like to do is take that and tell people it's not really a buzzword, it's actual truth. And your nervous system does have a lot to do with how you process information, your fight or flight response, whether you are stuck in that freeze, whether you can come back to the parasympathetic. There's so much that happens. It's just people are just now kind of talking about it more mainstream. I think it's been going on for years. I just think that it's coming more into the mainstream because we have so many people, like you said, oh, I have anxiety, I have depression. We just have learned to accept it. And I don't think that we should. I think that we have a bunch of modalities and tools and tips and things that people can try on to see what works for them. But if we start to do the body work, if we start to address below the head, people can really change the trajectory of their life, not just in their marriage, but in all aspects of their life. Because again, when you start to learn like what your triggers are or where that trauma came from and how to kind of undo some of that. So I think that's the next question I wanted to ask you is when someone comes to you, we'd have to make up like an example, but if someone comes to you and let's say, their whole childhood, their whole life, they were told, or they believed that they weren't good enough and their voice didn't matter. And so they basically like suppressed that along the way. How do you get people to start working through? Because I think for a lot of women, even if it's not a big thing, I think voice is important for women to make sure that they have in check because a lot don't.
Yes. The first place that I start with all of my clients is learning how to dissolve shame and embody radical self acceptance and self compassion. Because, especially in, my community, the women coming in, they are the high achievers, the go getters, the women who have accomplished things, but internally or behind the scenes are just, crumbling. And so, with that high achieving, go getter spirit, often comes a really high inner critic. And so, yeah, sometimes it comes from childhood, having that internal script and that being recorded in your nervous system of I'm not good enough or I'm not worthy. There's so many stories that are playing in the background. So we start there with dissolving shame because honestly, it doesn't matter like how great the tools are. You learn from there on out how great the work is. It's all going to go in one ear out the other if you're in a freaking shame storm. So
Okay.
we start there and then we get into laying a foundation of safety. Nobody can heal without feeling safe and like really learning how to feel safe again in your own body. When you're mentioning the fight response, the flight response, the freeze, all of that is just, evidence or a signal that we don't feel safe in our own body. We're trying to run in some way or flee in some way. We leave our body and often get lost in our head with rumination or with anxiety. or with our different, coping mechanism cocktail of choice, escaping. And so we learn how to feel safe again. And in moments of trigger, being able to lean into that and stay with ourselves. So, an example of that is we'll learn grounding techniques. And by that, I just mean one that a lot of my clients love is the five senses. So, next time you're triggered, noticing, just pausing and noticing what are five things you see in your room around you, four things you can hear, three things you can physically touch, two things you can smell, one thing you can taste. And what that does is it brings you out of that fight flight response and back into what's called the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest, digest, I can breathe, I am safe. So safety is foundational after shame. And then we get into more practicals of navigating triggers. Then we get into identity work. And that's the stuff where we look into what do I really believe about myself, like deep down subconscious level, and what do I want others to believe about me or feel about me, not in a people pleasing way, but more in like a legacy way. Like when we're thinking about the end of our life and we're breathing our last breath, and in retrospect, like what imprint have we left in the world, and how did we show up for our kids, and what are our, friends and family and those that we touched going to remember us like, and being able to design our life from that like higher, wiser, sage perspective. Now that we've done the groundwork, then we have a chance to be able to move into that stuff.
I love that. I love that whole framework. I think that's an amazing program. I think that a lot of people, if you are looking for something like that, I think Becky would definitely be your person. One of the things I wanted to mention about the grounding is that sometimes, depending on where you are, just from my experience, where you are in that fight or flight, you may have to go through that exercise several times in a row to actually bring you out of that, like the freak out moment, like the flight, the wanting to run, the upsetness, whatever it is that's triggering you at that time. So it's not just you're going to do those five things and then you're going to totally be calm sometimes. But the more you do that and the more you practice it, the more your body gets in tune with what that exercise does for you, and it will happen sooner. So sometimes at the beginning, my daughter had some stuff to work through, obviously not marriage, and she would say that doesn't work. And I said, well, it's not working because you're so hyped up. You've got to do it a couple of times. You've got to really allow your body to come down, but you keep doing it because it takes you out of the perpetual thoughts of whatever it was that was triggering you. And so for people listening, if you've never grounded, or if you've only done it a couple of times and you're someone who says it doesn't work for me, I would invite you to try it again, but do it in a way that you're a little more curious. How many times do I have to do it in order to come down, and then the next time, and then see over time, because our body does get conditioned, and those tools are there to teach our body to come back to safety. It's to teach you to come back down. And so I hear a lot of people saying like that doesn't work. And so I just wanted to put that out there, that anything new you're trying, you have to give your body time to understand what you're actually doing. And so give yourself grace and, just keep trying it over and over.
100%. I'm so glad you said that. And it really is, an invitation for people to do exactly what you said, try different things on, see what fits. That's what I'm there for, to help them guide, to see if like, do we need a grounding thing right now where your energy just needs to be anchored, and rooted? Or do we need kind of an upregulation thing where you're a volcano about to explode and you actually need to release, not ground? So a difference for that, sometimes the five senses is a tool you could use. Other times, yeah, that's not what you want to go to. You want to go to if there's like pent up fear or panic or anger, like shaking it out, literally. Levine wrote this awesome book called Waking the Tiger, and he talks about how animals in the wild and domestic, you can see it if you have a cat or dog, if they come into the face of danger, like a life-threatening thing, after the danger has passed, they'll shake like that. And my cat did it the other day. She got like accidentally closed in a cabinet and we let her out and I saw her whole body shake. And it's a natural way that animals release trauma. And we can do that too, but we've been so conditioned to be proper and sit up straight and hold it together. And we're sophisticated. And so we end up trapping and holding a lot of stuff inside because it feels like a real threat to our nervous system to lose like social acceptance. We are pack animals. And so being able to shake it out sometimes in private, maybe not in the middle of Target, but
or maybe in the middle of Target, sometimes it is what it is. I'm glad you said that, because I was thinking back to, like, when your kids are little and they have like a tantrum and they cry, and because they can't express and they can't get out, and then they kind of start to get it together, and they start coming down. I vividly can remember my younger daughter when she would do that, and she would kind of do like a shake, and that's funny that you say that, because I never thought that is what it was happening. But I do remember that when she would finally start to calm down and stop crying, she would do, which is probably something similar, to her helping herself. But again, see, when you're little, you're not conditioned to be that proper. You're not conditioned to hold it together. You're not conditioned to keep quiet. It's like your body is releasing. So I think, looking back on my parenting, now where I'm at, I wouldn't, obviously, I did the best that I could with what I had at the time, but my goal in parenting was to change some of the things that in the ways I was parented. And not that my parents did a terrible job, but it was like I had different tools and different visions for being a parent. And so I tried different things on. And it was very easy with my first child because she was more compliant. And she just, you could explain something to her. But my second child was not that way. She was my test, right? And so what I have found is, now looking back, allowing them to have I let them have a voice, because I think when we grew up, it was like the child was seen and not heard, basically. So I tried giving them a voice, or allowing them to have one. But now with what I know, I probably would have done it in a bigger fashion. So now what I do with them in their older ages is I've tried to really help them to find their voice even more so than what we gave them in their younger years, because I know now how important having a voice and trusting your gut and knowing right from wrong is not just knowing right from wrong. It's actually sitting with those feelings. And like you said, that intuition, that gut feeling. And then what do you do with that? Because I think people feel things and know things, but they don't address it because they're like, well, that's too much for me. And so I'm not going to. And that's where the suppressed feelings come in, and the suppressed trauma stays. I was so fascinated. I think it was Gabby Bernstein, her book, Happy Days. I don't know if you've read that, but she really talked a lot about trauma and healing and all of that. And that was my first kind of book reading something like that. And it was very fascinating about how we do store trauma within ourselves and in our body. So again, I love what you're doing. I think what you're doing is so needed. And I can't wait for more people to learn from you. And what you do, I hope, becomes more mainstream for people. And again, not just marriage, but in all aspects of life, to learn how to, heal themselves from what they have stored in their body so they can live their best and their healthiest life. Yeah. So how do people find you?
I ditto what you just said. That's huge. Easiest way to find me is on Instagram. It's Becky_Aste, and you can come say hi. I'll say hi back in the DMs. And I also have a free training, 3 Secrets to Thriving Intimacy. Take that how you want, whether it's intimacy in a marriage or intimacy with yourself. That is a completely free training that basically shares the secrets I wish I had been told 10 years ago before wasting what feels like a decade of time. Actually, not wasting. It was just more like learning a lot of information, good information, that it was almost like it was latent, and this somatic work has really woken it up and allowed me to embody it.
That's awesome. And, anybody who's married, again, whether you have the best marriage or the worst marriage or something in between, everybody can learn from this. everybody can better themselves and better their marriage no matter where you're at. I feel like, just like with health and wellness, it is a journey. It is not and there's no ending to it. And so the more you grow and your partner grows and you guys grow together, it makes for a better future, really. And where I'm sitting now, being in almost a full empty nester, last year, you get to a point where you look at each other and you're like, oh, we're going to be alone again. Like after 20 years of like having chaos, constant chaos with the kids and all of this other stuff and making time for each other, but it's very different. And so now it's like, at first you're kind of scared because you're like, well, we haven't done like just life with us in 20 something years. And now, but I think again, with the skills I know now, we're getting to a more excited point, where it's like, oh, this is what our future could look like. And we're making plans for, that next chapter of obviously, including and excluding the kids, so it's very different. But I think people who have young kids, the marital part is a crazy time because it's like, you're not really focused. You focus on each other before you have kids. And when you have kids, that just throws a whole nother dynamic into the relationship where it can get hairy. And so again, anybody who's listening to this, who's in a relationship, in a marriage, in relationship with themselves, really can learn some of these tools from Becky and apply them to life in general. So thank you so much for coming on. This topic has just really enlightened me so much. And it was something I really couldn't wait to talk to you about because it's not something that I know a lot about. So now I'm really intrigued and I definitely want to do your free training and just kind of see, where that takes me. I think I'm always introduced to things for reasons. So I'm really anxious to learn from you. Before we end, I always like to ask all the people that come on my podcast, because this podcast is about, wellness from a holistic lens. What are a couple of things that you do on a daily basis that allows you to live your most healthiest, vibrant life day to day?
I love that question. One that I was so out of the habit of and have been able to recently get back in the habit of, for me, I'm a journaler. It always helps me feel tethered, grounded, connected to God. So I consistently journal. And then movement, whether that's yoga or dancing, like just in my, own living room, moving my body and not allowing it to become stagnant. And then the last one I would say is just the somatic practices. Those are kind of just becoming second nature throughout the day. But if I am triggered, I will either shake it out or pull out a grounding tool and just come back to safety. The goal is not just a calm nervous system all the time. None of us are going to be calm all the time, but regulated to know how to, when we are triggered, just come back home.
I love that. And what I want to say to that last point that you just made is this is a journey. It's not, there's even with your work, there's not you start here and you end here. You will always be using these tools throughout life because we always have dips. We always go back to what we know in our subconscious and in what we've been kind of programmed to do. And that's the same with all aspects of wellness. So when you have those dips, when you have the tools, you come out of the dips much faster. And like you said, they become second nature. So when something arises, these tools that you now have in place that other people could learn could be part of their toolbox. So thank you for bringing that up, because I think some people feel like if they don't perfect things, because we have that perfection mindset, and things just are not always as they should be, or they think they should be, then we are failing and we're not doing something right. But in actuality, you are doing something right because you're learning and then implementing and learning and implementing. And that's just the journey of life. So thank you for bringing that up. I appreciate it. So for those of you guys listening, all of Becky's information will be in the show notes. You guys should check her out on Instagram. Make sure if you're at all interested, hop onto her free little workshop that she's going to do, and just get curious and see if it's something that resonates with you, because unless you look and try, you will never know. So with that being said, I hope everybody has a great day and we will talk to you soon. Bye.